Chapter 301 Enemy on a Narrow Road. Hushi was shocked, but just as she was about to ask him how to find the array's core, her gaze suddenly focused on something in the distance. Almost at the same time, a happy voice traveled from within the white fog. "Big brother, so as it turns out, you're here. We've finally found you." When Hushi heard this voice, the look on her face abruptly changed and a murderous glint appeared in her eyes. That was the voice of Feng Lianying. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 figures materialized one after another from the white fog to appear in front of her. In addition to Feng Lianying, who had a look of pleasant surprise on her face, walking beside her was Nie Jinshan and some disciples of the Luli sect. Most of these disciples were at the peak of Meridian stage, but there were also a few low-leveled gold core stage martial artists. Besides Feng Lianying and Nie Jinshan, amongst the people with them, there was also one other person that Hushi recognized. It was the third prince, Shangguan Rue, and his 2 gold core stage personal bodyguards that she'd met at the entrance of Hell King Manor. Hushi's face became very unsightly. She hadn't expected that the black-clothed man would actually be Feng Lianying's older brother. Not only that, but dealing with an enemy on a narrow road. In the midst of this white fog, she had unexpectedly bumped into this vicious white lotus, Feng Lianying. Sure enough, Feng Lianying's attention was so focused on the black-clothed man that she hadn't seen Hushi yet. But, as soon as she turned her head, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but widen before she instantly uttered a scream filled with anger and resentment. "Slut! Why are you here?" Hushi's hand clenched tightly around a vine of the purple abyss vine, while cold sweat seeped out of her palms. Although, on the surface, her face was expressionless as she sneeringly said, "Who is the slut that's calling someone a slut?" "Of course the slut is calling," Feng Lianying started saying before she realized what she'd said and stopped. She couldn't help but snarl as she took out her flying sword to stab at Hushi. But she'd forgotten that in this white fog, she was unable to use spiritual power, rendering the flying sword just like an ordinary long sword. On top of that, she was just like a useless person without enough strength to even truss a chicken. Feng Lianying had only just managed to feebly thrust the flying sword forward before Hushi stopped it, and then without hesitation, lift her foot to fiercely kicked Feng Lianying's stomach. Feng Lianying screamed as she flew back like a kite with an abruptly snapped string before she then crashed down hard to the ground. With a deathly pale complexion, she covered her stomach and started to incessantly howl in pain. When Nie Jinshan saw that Feng Lianying was seriously injured, he was startled and filled with heartache. Quickly approaching her, he helped support her to sit up, and then stuffed a medicinal pill into her mouth. "Little sister Lianying, are you all right?" Feng Lianying clutched his wrist with her nails deeply embedding themselves into his flesh, and with a slightly hysterical voice said, "Kill him. Kill that slut for me. I'll grind his bones into dust and scatter the powder." Okay. Little sister Lianying, rest assured, I will definitely take revenge for you." With that, Nie Jinshan suddenly stood up and bellowed towards the disciples of the Luli sect behind him, "Kill that stinky brat and dismember his body for me. Whoever ends up killing him, I will inform the clan head and recommend that they are allowed to become an inner sect disciple." After having said that, a green disc instantly appeared in his hand. At first, the disc didn't seem to be anything remarkable. Yet, when Nie Jinshan bit the tip of his tongue and allowed the blood to drip onto the disc, it suddenly lit up with a dazzlingly bright green light. The weapon that had initially lacked spiritual power fluctuations instantly absorbed a part of the spiritual power within the white fog and began to emit an intense aura. The elegant yet frail-looking teenager stood alone in the white fog, and with the purple-colored vine in his hand shuddering slightly, a corner of his mouth curled up to form a stubborn sneer. Chapter 302 Big Brother. As 10 or so martial artists rushed towards her, Hushi was like a lone wolf being surrounded by a group of beasts. It was clear that in the next moment she would be torn to shreds, yet she didn't cower or show any signs of fear. The disc in Nie Jinshan's hand flew directly towards Hushi as he leapt into the air while roaring, "Go die!" The disc gave him a brief burst of spiritual power, giving him the confidence to feel that he could dismember this vile bastard's body that had wounded his little sister Lianing. But immediately after yelling, a scene occurred that shocked him to the core. The moment that disc arrived before Hushi, it abruptly started trembling. Following that, a purple-colored shadow wrapped around it until it formed a ball. That purple shadow was, of course, a purple-colored vine and a fifth-ranked devil plant, the purple abyss vine. The purple abyss vine had been like an excited puppy as it dashed towards the disc and in a short time, tightly wrapped its vines around it. Then, like a big mouth, the disc was swallowed whole. A crunching noise, similar to that of a chewing sound, came from the purple vine and mixed with a rustling sound caused by the purple vine swaying in excitement. In the deathly quiet fog, these sounds echoed in the surroundings and were particularly frightening. You! Nie Jinshin clutched his chest, which was in pain, and pointed to Hushi, asking with a trembling voice, "How can you use spiritual power within the white fog?" A smirk appeared in a corner of Hushi's mouth, and the purple vine in her hand suddenly transformed into a whip. Next, the whip fiercely slashed at the closest disciple of the Luli sect. That person was merely at the meridian stage, so being hit by the purple abyss vine's whip caused him to immediately wail in pain and fall to the ground, a bloody and gruesome wound visible on his body. Watching as Feng Lianing, the person who had bullied her in the secret territory, now trembled on the ground with blood flowing from a corner of her mouth, Hushi felt pleased in her heart. It seemed that this white fog wasn't entirely lacking in benefits. When Feng Lianing met Hushi's disdain-filled eyes, she was no longer able to bear it. So standing up, she at first staggered before she then rushed towards the black-clothed man, brokenly weeping, "Big brother, you must help me take revenge." The black-clothed man frowned, his expression gloomy and cold as he slowly asked, "You know him?" Feng Lianying's body was on the verge of collapsing as she gave him a sad and heartbroken look and said in a trembling voice, "Big brother, that bastard is Shiyu. He cheated me and robbed me of my Zijin Palace inheritance. He also provoked the relationship between our Luli sect and Brother Yu. Obviously, he's a man, but he shamelessly seduced Brother Yu. Big brother, quickly kill that bastard for me." The eyes of the black-clothed man suddenly filled with frost. As his gaze fell on Hushi, he slowly stepped forward as he asked, "You seduced Nangongyu?" Feng Lianing felt delighted in her heart. However, the expression on her face showed even more sadness and distress. "Big brother, the injuries to my body were caused by him. He also joined with Gu Lufeng of Shengda Hall to speak rudely to us of the Luli sect. They said that even though we were from the Feng family, we still wouldn't enter their eyes. I'm so angry it's unbearable and want to teach him a lesson. Who would have thought that Brother Yu, who has always loved me dearly, would be bewitched by such a bastard and wholeheartedly protect him? Such a lowly person who doesn't know shamelessness and is a vicious bastard like him. I will never allow him to live in this world. Big brother, please kill him for me." Nie Jinshan, who was standing to the side, quickly echoed what Feng Lianing had said with, "Young master, I personally saw Gu Lufeng injure little sister Lianing. At that time, Nangongyu not only didn't help little sister Lianing, but he instead protected this loathsome brat. You must help seek justice for little sister Lianing." Chapter 303. Leave Nangongyu? Even though it was a matter that had nothing to do with himself, Shangguan Rue couldn't help but interrupt as he stood off to the side. "I've seen this boy in Hell King Manor before. The servants there all treat him extremely respectfully. It may be assumed that his relationship with Hell King must be exceptionally intimate." Hearing Shangguan Rue's words, Feng Lianing grit her teeth out of jealousy. But when she turned her head and saw the black-clothed man's gloomy look, a delighted smile couldn't help but spread across her face. Big brother had also hoped that the Feng family could be connected by marriage to Hell King Manor. Yet now this loathsome brat had inserted himself between her and Nangongyu, destroying their relationship with Hell King Manor. How could Big brother not be angry? Even though she didn't know what trick that brat had used, it was clear that in this white fog, these people weren't his match. The only one who could kill him was her big brother, Feng Yunjing. That's right, The black-clothed man in front of her was the young master of the Feng family. Songming Kingdom's most powerful and feared man of the Feng family, Feng Yunjing. Although the Luli sect was one of the 4 major sects in the Mi-Luo continent, in actuality, it was all because of the influence of the Feng family. In the Luli sect, Feng Lianying was capable of stirring up all sorts of trouble, and yet she could still be called the young head of the sect. But compared to her big brother, Feng Yunjing, in regards to terms of privilege or strength, it was like comparing clouds to mud. From a child until now, Feng Lianying had been afraid of this half-brother. Except for Nangongyu, she had never seen a man as fearful and powerful as her big brother. Therefore, as long as her big brother was willing to help her, killing this bastard would be as simple as crushing an ant. Feng Yunjing's face was gloomy and cold, leaving his thoughts utterly unreadable as he slowly walked towards Hushi. Hushi's expression was also no longer as willful as before, but instead grave as she tightly clenched the purple vine in her hand. Feng Yunjing didn't make any moves to attack her. Instead, he slowly walked to stand in front of Hushi, then darkly said, "Shiyu, is it? Perhaps I can give you an opportunity to not die." With a brief pause, he then suddenly took a step forward, closing the distance between the two of them before he arrogantly said, "As long as you vow to leave Nangongyu and never see him again, as well as helping me to break the major cloud array, I'll let you go." How does that sound? A corner of Hushi's mouth faintly curled upwards. "I can." Delight flashed deeply within Feng Yunjing's eyes without him realizing. However, he heard Hushi abruptly raise her voice while laughing lightly. "Of course, that's as long as you personally kill the people who offended me, who also happen to be in front of me." Her gaze fell upon Feng Lianying, and the smile on her mouth became more devilish. "As long as you personally kill Feng Lianying and Ye Jinshin, I will help you to break the major cloud array." "You say, how is it?" "You bastard!" After hearing the conversation between the pair, Feng Lianying screamed, and regardless of everything, she rushed towards Hushi. "Bastard! I want you to die. You better die. Go die. Go die." However, Feng Lianying had barely rushed towards Hushi before she was restrained by Feng Yunjing, leaving her completely unable to move even a simple step. Feng Lianying was shocked and raised her head to stare at her big brother. Then she hysterically screamed, "Feng Yunjing, even you are seduced by him? Such a shameless man. In the end, what's so good about him? Aren't you afraid that if Daddy knows?" Pete. The sounds of a slap echoed in their ears, and Feng Lianying was thrown to the ground by Feng Yunjing's hit. Lifting her head, she met with her big brother's dark and cold eyes, causing her to tremble all over. An unspeakable fear surged within her heart, draining her complexion to a deathly pale. "Big brother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. I said that out of anger." Feng Lianying's heart was full of fear, to the extent that her voice was trembling and making her words hard to understand. Chapter 304. Pray Feng Yunjing didn't look at her, rather. He looked towards Hushi and coldly said, "You have no option regarding this matter. Either you never see Nangongyu again and help me break the array, or, if I don't agree." Feng Yunjing's face sank, and he suddenly reached out his hand to grip Hushi's chin, forcing her to look up as he faintly sneered, "Did you use this face to bewitch Nangongyu? I see that it's indeed a feast for the eyes, but if Nangongyu were to know that you'd become one of my people, I wonder whether he would still want you or not." Arg dash. Feng Yunjing suddenly released Hushi's chin, his face ashen as he stepped backwards. Then, slowly reaching out his hand, he gently touched his earlobe. His hand unexpectedly felt something cold and damp before he realized it was blood. A gleam of killing intent flashed within Hushi's eyes, and the purple vine suddenly sprang out from behind her. Like a curtain that covered the sky, it erected a terrifying barrier behind her. "There may be another option, and that is, you all die." Her voice was laced with bone-chilling anger and humiliation, which made her jade-white face appear bright red like a peach blossom. This unexpectedly increased her beauty, to the point that she could easily hook a person's soul. A glint flashed across Feng Yunjing's eyes, and the smile on his face was dark and overbearing with the hint of his aggressive nature, indicating his thrill to a challenge. Very good. Never before has prey managed to escape from my hands. Shiyu, I'd like to see whether or not you can accomplish it. A blackish-blue flag sword, entangling itself with the purple vine and making it clear that they were evenly matched. A long sword appeared in Hushi's hand, and from the tip of the sword, countless shadow swords erupted that enveloped Feng Yunjing. Such an exquisite sword technique was like an illusion that utilized one's full strength to carry it out. Obviously, there were no spiritual power fluctuations, but it was like a gorgeous dance, beautiful and magnificent. Momentarily, the sky actually changed, with clouds and mist covering the sun. Feng Yunjing moved to avoid the sword's attack, as a touch of shock and admiration flashed within his eyes. Suddenly, his body emitted a red light, while a dark rumble echoed in the sky and rang in Hushi's ears. It's a pity, but if I were to let you continue advancing in this white fog, there's the possibility that not even I would be able to stop you. At this very moment, you are doomed to become my prey, Shiyu. As his words fell, the red light suddenly intensified, like blood condensing, before it then swept towards Hushi. The blazing atmosphere caused Hushi's steps to falter, and an amazed expression appeared on her face. There was obviously no spiritual power in the atmosphere, but when it touched her body, it was unexpectedly able to thoroughly absorb her physical energy. In just a moment, Hushi couldn't even lift her sword, and it fell to the ground with a clang. Her complexion became deathly pale, and her feet staggered as if she was about to fall. A corner of Feng Yunjing's mouth curled into a callous smile, and he extended one of his long arms to pull her into his embrace. Yet who would have thought that the moment he reached out his hand, he would be surprised? Feng Yunjing's figure rapidly retreated, but he was unable to avoid the full force of the sword wrapped in a murderous aura. This resulted in the cloth on his sleeve being torn and a ghastly cut to appear on his arm. Hushi's body became limp, yet instead of falling to the ground, she fell into a warm embrace. A familiar scent assailed her nostrils. It was like she had finally reached a safe harbor, a place she had been longing for with great expectations. Unaware of why, Hushi felt her nose itch as she softly called out a single name, Nangongyu. Nangongyu suddenly released her to grab her shoulders, examining every inch of her for injuries. The palms that touched her body were scalding hot, and at this moment, they were shaking slightly, showing how frightened the owner of the hands was. Chapter 305. If it's unreasonable this king indulges him, Nangongyu. I'm all right. My power is just depleted. That's all. Momentarily, Hushi was unsure whether to laugh or cry. In front of so many people, in the end. Until when was this guy going to continue touching her? In response to her, however, Nangongyu gathered her into his arms and tightly embraced her. Sheer, fortunately you're all right. Fortunately, I found you, Sheer. Hushi felt extreme pain, like her bones were being crushed. This man was acting like he wanted to fuse her to himself, making her unable to breathe. But deep in her heart, there flowed a warmth that she couldn't precisely pinpoint, making her restless, angry, and lonely heart of a moment ago become calm. It wasn't until a good while later that Nangongyu finally loosened his hold on Hushi, then turned towards Feng Yunjing. Feng Yunjing's eyes narrowed slightly, a cold and dangerous light gleaming within them. His gaze fell on Nangongyu's hands, one of which was firmly wrapped around the youngster's slender waist, while the other was helping to tidy up the youngster's hair now and then. It also regularly drifted down to stroke his warm and tender cheek, as if confirming his existence. The youngster, who was still confronting him with bared fangs like a fierce little beast a moment ago, was now nestled in Nangongyu's arms, looking utterly adorable and docile. The two people standing together and cuddling seemed like a pair of jade annulus made in heaven, both male and female, as beautiful as a painting. So beautiful, it was unpleasant to the eye. Before Feng Yunjing had a chance to say anything, Feng Lianying's voice was heard sobbing behind him. Brother Yu, why do you only care about whether or not young master she was injured? I was ambushed by him just a moment ago, and until now, my stomach is still in a lot of pain. Aren't you concerned about me even a little bit? In your heart, do our feelings for each other, over so many years, not even compare with this treacherous boy? Hushi raised her eyebrows, and she couldn't help but step backwards from the hands that were looped around her body. Yes, she had just beaten up Feng Lianing. Moreover, after she'd finished beating her up, until now, she'd felt very pleased. She would like to see how Nan Gongyu would react when he saw that his beloved little sister Lian Ying had sustained an injury, and what's more, it was caused by her. Seeing her wanting to get away from him, Nan Gongyu's face sank. Suddenly, he reached out his hands to pull her back, firmly imprisoning her in his arms. His icy cold eyes landed on Feng Lianing, and slowly speaking with a calm tone, he said, "Sheer is one of this king's people. Anything that he does, if it's justified, this king lets him do as he pleases. If it's unreasonable, then this king indulges him. If you're dissatisfied, then you can bring it up with this king. However, if anyone dares to lay a hand on Sheer behind my back, then don't blame me for being impolite." Feng Lianing watched as Nan Gongyu said this with dagger-like eyes as he glared at Feng Yunjing. Fury flashed in Feng Yunjing's eyes, and he coldly asked, "Nan Gongyu, did you hit your head on something? For a guy with an unknown origin, you want to oppose my Feng family?" Following that, Feng Yunjing's gaze fell on Hushi while he grit his teeth, the voice leaving his mouth unexpectedly ruthless and irritable. "In the end, what method did he use to seduce you? His outstanding face? Lascivious body? Or maybe it was that skillful little mouth? If it's a man or woman like him that you want, then the Feng family can find a few more for you. For trash like him, you dare to offend our Feng family and abuse the kindness we used to save your life? Is he really worth it? Nan Gongyu, it's better for you to give him to me to deal with. How does that sound? Believe me, with such an outcome, both the Feng family and Hell King Manor will be satisfied." The coldness in Hexie's eyes suddenly intensified with his words, while rage surged in her chest to cause a strong murderous aura to overflow from her entire body. Chapter 306. Just a warning: this man had repeatedly humiliated her and made her angry to the point where she wished she could dismember his body. Due to her anger, her eyes shone bright like stars, while her lips were as delicate and exquisite as rose petals. Her skin was like sparkling and translucent jade flushed with a scarlet peach blossom color. Such world-shaking beauty was bound to stand out from the masses. Seeing the scene in front of him, Feng Yunjing became somewhat crazy, and an intense urge to monopolize him bloomed within his heart. This person, he wanted him. The purple abyss vine in Hushi's hand shook violently as if at any moment it would be unable to resist intervening. However, Nan Gongyu moved faster than her, and a long, black sword appeared in his hand, its sharp end pointing straight towards Feng Yunjing. Even though a gentle and noble smile hung on his face, the coldness in his eyes seemed to emphasize his feelings of wanting to tear the man before him to shreds. "Feng Yunjing, did you forget? Outside of the secret territory, you're not my match." He paused, and the curve at a corner of his mouth became more gentle, but seemed to emit a bloodthirsty feeling that could make anyone's hair stand on end. "In this major cloud array, your cultivation base is worthless. If I wanted to take your life, it would be as easy as flipping my hand." That said, a blinding green ray of light burst from his body. Following this, his figure abruptly disappeared from where he'd stood. Blood refining body cultivator of the 4th rank. One of the disciples of the Lu Li sect couldn't help uttering a roar of horror. Wasn't Hell King a high-level spiritual cultivation martial artist? Why is he also a blood-refining body cultivator? No one with a dual soul cultivation base had appeared for over 1,000,000 years. In the end, to what extent was Hell King's true strength? Shock also emerged in Feng Yunjing's eyes, and he rapidly stepped backwards to summon all kinds of spiritual weapons to his hands. However, in comparison, Nan Gongyu's long sword was faster and more ruthless. The sword arrived at where Feng Yunjing was standing, and before he was able to transfer all his spiritual power to the spiritual weapons, they all fell to the ground with a clatter. Feng Yunjing's eyes finally revealed no small amount of shock. Just as he wanted to open his mouth to speak, a field of overwhelming power seemed to envelop him. This caused his expression to become deathly pale and his throat to be blocked, making him unable to utter a sound. If they were outside of the major cloud array, he didn't believe that he would lose to Nangongyu. Plus, coupled with all the spiritual weapon arrays left in the hands of the Feng family, it absolutely wouldn't be an easy task for Nangongyu to take advantage of him. But this major cloud array could absorb a person's spiritual power to the last drop, leave only a smidgen of spiritual power to remain in spiritual weapons, and reduce other types of weapons to scrap iron. He himself couldn't even display 1/10 of his usual strength. Feng Yunjing's complexion turned an unsightly shade before his gaze swept over to Hushi, who was standing nearby and watching. Shock and anger, plus a surge of fighting spirit, rose within his heart. He was unwilling to lose face in front of him. Seeing Nangongyu's powerful sword, Nye Jinshen, who had been foolishly watching all this time, suddenly sobered and shouted, "Nangongyu, have mercy." However, Nangongyu didn't seem to hear him. The sword suddenly thrust forward and severely pierced Feng Yunjing's left shoulder. Yet while it had missed his heart, it was still dangerously close to it. A deadly silence descended within the white fog. The sound of the sword-piercing flesh still rung in their ears. Everyone was frightened by Hell King's horrible strength and ruthlessness, so for a moment, they all kept quiet out of fear. Nangongyu withdrew the black sword and coldly said, "This time was just a warning, but next time, you won't be so lucky." Chapter 307, Rare Treasure, Big Brother. It was at this time that Feng Lianing finally returned to her senses, and she rushed over to support Feng Yunjing, but her hatred-filled gaze locked onto Nangongyu. "Brother Yu, how could you be so heartless? For such a lowly person, you even disregarded the kindness my Feng family has shown towards you?" Xing, once again unsheathing the sword, it was then pointed straight at Feng Lianing. The gleaming cold tip of the sword was less than a centimeter away from her throat and had even managed to cut the delicate skin, resulting in a subtle amount of pain. A corner of Nangongyu's mouth raised and he slowly said, "If it were not because of the kindness the Feng family had shown me, you all would have died in this white fog long ago. Even your bones would no longer exist." Feng Lianing still wanted to say something more, but when her eyes met with Nangongyu's dark and piercing ones, her breath suddenly caught in her throat. With her face becoming pale, she was momentarily unable to utter a single word. All the disciples of the Luli sect rushed over, worried about the condition of Feng Yunjing's injury. Feng Yunjing pushed them all away, his fathomless black eyes examining the wound on his chest. But when he raised his head once again, his face held no trace of ruthlessness, only calmness. "Nangongyu, is that person really that important to you?" Nangongyu slowly walked back to stand beside Hushi, and reaching out his hand, he gently kneaded her small hand. It wasn't until Hushi had ignored him by flinging his hand away that he'd coldly looked at Feng Yunjing and faintly said, "Sheer is my treasure. A rare treasure that no one is allowed to covet or touch. What do you think? Is he important or not?" Hushi couldn't help rub at the goosebumps that had raised on her arms when she heard that. When had this guy learned to speak so disgustingly? However, she didn't realize that a corner of her mouth had lifted into a shallow curve. Feng Yunjing's gaze swept over Hushi's face, his eyes burning with anger and envy that quickly disappeared. His face was still without any trace of emotion. "Good. I can promise to let him off, as well as ignore your relationship with him for the time being. But you have to let him use his purple abyss vine to help us break the major cloud array." That said, Feng Yunjing looked towards Hushi and slowly said, "As long as you agree to help us break the major cloud array and enter the medicinal field, I promise that all disciples of my Luli sect will not make a move against you while we're in the sealed dragon domain. How about it?" Feng Lianing couldn't help but shriek, "Big brother, why should we let him off?" However, as Feng Yunjing's sharp eyes glanced at her, Feng Lianing felt her voice tremble and she no longer dared to speak. Hushi frowned as she mentally weighed the advantages and disadvantages of entering the medicinal field with these people. Just at this moment, Gu Lufeng, Qing Long, Wu Yu, and the others rushed towards them. Once they saw that Hushi wasn't hurt, Gu Lufeng immediately hurried forward and happily said, "Little Yue, it's good that you're all right." While saying that, his hand was reaching out to touch Hushi's shoulder. The next second, four piercingly cold eyes swept towards him, causing Gu Liufeng's hand to freeze mid-air. He didn't dare touch Hushi now. Nangongyu pulled Hushi into his arms as he glared at Gu Lufeng in warning, before he then bowed his head towards Hushi and said, "You should agree. Inside the medicinal field, if there's anything that you want, I will help you to get it." Although Nangongyu had confidence regarding his profound cultivation base, if the Luli sect really focused their attention on Hushi, then after they left the secret territory, Hushi would be in danger at every turn. Hushi was slightly startled, but she immediately realized the outcome of the situation if she refused. She turned to Feng Yunjing and indifferently said, "Okay, I can help you to break the major cloud array, but we'll be doing it my way." Feng Yunjing was surprised. "Your way?" Chapter 308, 100 Herb Mist Correct. Hushi laughed faintly. "No need to spend time finding the array's core again, because as long as we directly find all 64 parts of the array's eye inside the major cloud array and break them together within a short time, that will suffice." Surprise flashed within Feng Yunjing's eyes, but before he could speak, Nie Jinshen had already exclaimed, "Don't speak nonsense. With there being 64 parts of array's eye, how could we find and break them all in a short time?" Hushi sneered, and like a purple flame, the purple abyss vine in her hand soared, shooting away in all directions. Her voice was like ice crystals falling onto a jade plate, crisp and pleasant to listen to as she spoke with perfect confidence. "Just because you're incapable of doing it, it doesn't mean that I am too. I have already found the locations of all 64 parts of the array's eye. Now, all of you just need to follow the directions of these 64 purple vines to break the array's eye." Everyone present, including Gu Lufeng, Qing Long, and the rest, all had their eyes wide open in shock. As they looked at the beautiful youngster before them, it was like we're looking at an unbelievable monster. The white fog was a place where nobody was able to use spiritual power, and concealed within it were the 64 parts of the array's eye. By just controlling a 5th-rank devil plant, the purple abyss vine, all 64 parts were easily found. How formidable would a person's divine sense be to be able to do that? How strong would their mental power be? Before them was a youngster who was merely on the foundation establishment stage. In the end, just how did he accomplish it? Feng Yunjing's burning gaze focused on the youngster surrounded by purple vines. The light within his eyes was like a burning flame, expressing his strong desire and determination to possess him. Nangongyu took note of Feng Yunjing's gaze, and his long eyelashes slightly lowered, covering the sharp gleam within his eyes. With the guidance of the purple abyss vine, all 64 parts of the array's eye in the major cloud array were very quickly broken, one by one. The moment when the last part of the array's eye was shattered, Hushi and the others felt an aggressive wind push against them. The white fog before them was swept away by something, and in a flash, it disappeared without a trace. Even the dampness in the air was suddenly restored to a more normal temperature. In the locations where all the parts of the array's eye had been, a bright light abruptly flashed, and a portal array appeared. Without a doubt, this was the portal door to the medicinal field, 100 Herbs Mist. Hushi had already informed everyone that after all 64 parts of the array's eye had been broken, the time frame for the major cloud array to be disabled would be short. They had to take this opportunity to enter the portal array, or else the subsequent white fog would be more intense and horrible than before. Therefore, almost at the moment when the portal array had appeared, the people of Hell King Manor and the Luli sect had immediately stepped inside. For the martial artists who were trapped within the white fog, unable to leave, once they saw the Luli sect enter the portal array, they quickly followed and entered the portal array too. After the time it took to take a few breaths, the white fog reformed and covered the road ahead with a hazy dampness, causing the remaining people within the white fog to scream in fright and despair. However, this was something that Hushi and the others were unaware of as they had already entered the medicinal field. As soon as she entered the medicinal field, Hushy's senses were assaulted with intense spiritual energy that was mixed with the pure fragrance of plants. Looking up slightly, her expression quickly changed into one of astonishment. The legendary treasure that countless martial artists had fought over, the medicinal field, 100 herb mist, was now before her. The medicinal field was really too large. Stretching out in all directions, it was almost impossible to see the edges. Divided into 4 squares, each square contained 1 or 2 types of herbs. Among these medicinal herbs, the lowest grade one was a matured 2nd grade spiritual plant. Chapter 309. Unlimited craziness and greed. The side of the medicinal field near where everyone stood, there were rare 4th grade and 5th grade spiritual plants. In regards to every herb, if just a single stalk was sold, the profit would easily be enough to support the entirety of a small sect. On top of that, many of the spiritual plants found here in 100 herb mist were uncommon. Hushy gazed into the distance and noticed that about a few hundred meters away, located approximately in the center of the medicinal field, there was a hill covered with green plants. The hill was approximately 4 to 5 meters in height and neither looked special or majestic. Yet on the mountain, who knew what treasure was planted there, but it actually emitted a splendid multicolored light. While Hushy was studying the multicolored lights, she smelt the scent of a rich medicinal fragrance that was faintly emitted into the air. For a moment, she felt her blood race and itched to grab every treasure in the medicinal field, stuffing them all into her bag. However, such a burning desire lasted only a moment before she immediately became clear-headed and slightly frowned. This medicinal field, it seemed a bit odd. Whether it was because of the extremely expensive spiritual plants inside the medicinal field, or the intoxicating medicinal fragrance permeating the air, but the martial artists in the area seemed seriously out of sorts. Just then, from the side, there came the sound of everyone inhaling deep breaths before the sounds of exclamation and excitement reached Hushy's ears. Heavens! This is 100 herb mist? I'm not dreaming. I thought that I'd be trapped in the white fog forever and would die in there. I didn't expect to get in here. I'm so blessed that I must be going to die soon. Hurry up. Quickly take everything. These medicinal herbs belong to our Xianhe sect. When we bring these back with us, we'll make a fortune. Ha ha ha. Hushy turned her head and saw a group of people with their eyes blood red. It looked like they'd lost all reason. They were all staring at the medicinal field with fixed gazes, while their eyes were slowly becoming more bloodshot and glinted with unlimited craziness and greed. The next moment, it was unknown who, but someone suddenly shouted, "Quickly take everything." This group of people had actually lost their minds, and like crazy, they all rushed into the medicinal field. Amongst these people, the aloof 3rd prince, Shangguan Rue, and his bodyguards were included. Shangguan Rue's cultivation base was usually not considered high, and almost all of his spiritual power had been drained away by the white fog. But at this very moment, he looked like he was being hit by a rush of stimulants as he immediately took the lead in rushing into the medicinal field. His hands that were pulling at the herbs were continually trembling, and his mouth kept muttering, "Jianling seed, Tianyuan fruit. As long as I have these, I'll be able to advance to gold core stage. Jianling Kingdom's throne will be mine, ha ha ha." While this was happening, Shangguan Rue's 2 personal bodyguards who were expert gold core stage martial artists were also acting crazy as they rushed into the medicinal field, incessantly picking the herbs. The scene quickly turned into chaos as the martial artists advanced from crazily picking the herbs to irrationally fighting over them without restraint. Someone seized a Tianyuan fruit and laughed loudly. "This time I'll be able to make a bunch of money. However, this is a Tianyuan fruit. 1,000-year-old Tianyuan fruit. If you consume just one, you can extend your life by 100 years. Ha ha ha." However, his laughter quickly cut off with a grunt. Blood sprayed from his throat, and his body fell powerlessly to the ground, while the Tianyuan fruit in his hand was quickly snatched away. The medicinal field was filled with people, and they were obviously high-level martial artists. Yet at this moment, it was like a fight in the markets as they completely ignored their images. In order for their newly plucked herbs to stay within their grasps, Some people began to stuff the herbs into their mouths. The high-level spiritual plants were covered with mud and blood, and as they were swallowed, it seemed to make those that ate them become more excitable and crazy. Chapter 310. Wait and see in just a moment. The initially well-organized medicinal field was reduced to chaos. The air that had been permeated with the smell of medicinal herbs was now being replaced by the coppery/metallic stench of blood. Shortly, some of the best high-grade spiritual plants would be devoured by these insane martial artists. One of the bodyguards who had followed from Hell King Manor couldn't help but be anxious as he asked, "Young Master Shi, aren't we going to join in?" Seeing that the high-grade herbs in the medicinal field were going to be utterly ruined soon, they were getting somewhat restless. Hashi shook her head. "This medicinal field is obviously weird. You need to be careful." It was reasonable to say that these martial artists who could enter the Greenwood realm and manage to survive in the white fog were absolutely not lacking in carefulness. However, as soon as they entered the medicinal field, they seemed to have lost all reason. Typically, their first priority after leaving the white fog with no spiritual power would have been to restore their spiritual power by meditation, while being aware of the possibility of other people attacking them. Even if they really wanted to collect medicinal herbs, they would have first fully prepared themselves. Otherwise, even if they got the herb they wanted, it would be snatched away by someone. Not to mention, these martial artists were directly stuffing the medicinal herbs into their mouths. Consuming the medicinal herbs this way would result in the effect reaching less than 1/10 of its potential, and instead, it could precipitate harmful impurities entering the body. Even if these people were greedy, it was impossible for them to make such a stupid choice. Unless they'd all lost their minds. With this thought, Hushi's eyes couldn't help but scrutinize the area. It didn't need to be said, but Nan Gongyu, Gu Lufeng, and the others in their group calmly watched the chaotic scene before them as if they were watching a farce. Feng Yunjing and Feng Lianing were also both standing there majestically and motionlessly, showing that they hadn't lost their minds in the slightest. Even the disciples of the Luli sect remained in place. Although they looked impatient, they didn't dare act rashly. Of course, it wasn't only these two groups of people who didn't lose all reason. Whether they were a martial artist on Meridian stage or Gold Core stage, those with strong resolutions had avoided being enthralled by the medicinal field. Only, although they weren't frenzied, they still had anxious looks on their faces. "Young Master Shi, even if this medicinal field is peculiar, if we don't do something soon, all the 5th-grade spiritual plants will be ruined. Our Hell King Manor has plenty of attention-focusing pills that can clear the mind and calm the soul. As long as we take one, we won't become insane. So isn't it better for us to pick the herbs?" Chapter 311. The Safest Place? Everyone now had a relaxed expression on their face, and they were looking at Feng Lianing with gazes of admiration and gratefulness. All the martial artists in the medicinal field who had been killing each other and devouring the medicinal herbs gradually began to sober, each of them revealing a horrified and confused expression. Abruptly, there were sudden exclamations from the people that had sobered, so it was all thanks to Luli Sect's Ice Lotus Fairy. It's no wonder that she had such methods to easily dispel the mind confusion. Ice Lotus Fairy is indeed a person with a virtuous heart like in the legends. Everyone in the medicinal field can escape calamity today thanks to the help of such a fairy. The praises coming from all the people made a haughty and arrogant expression appear on Feng Lianying's face. But when she looked at Nan Gongyu, her eyes became gentle and watery. "It's just a minor accomplishment, nothing worth mentioning. To be able to help everyone is Lianying's privilege. Brother Yu, quickly go pick the spiritual plants in the medicinal field. Many of spiritual plants here are rare, so maybe even your illness will be able to benefit greatly." For the martial artists who had now become cleared-headed and were waiting outside the medicinal field, once they heard her words, some of them couldn't endure any longer, and they rushed back into the medicinal field. This act caused the anxiety of Hell King Manor's bodyguards to increase. Even Wu Yu was eager to move forward and pick herbs in the medicinal field. However, Hushi held out a hand to stop them. "Hold on. This medicinal field is rather complicated. You shouldn't act rashly. Feng Lian mockingly laughed at Hushi. Isn't young Master Shi too cautious? 100 Herb Mist is in Greenwood Realm, however. It was personally created and planted by Zijin's master. The white fog surrounding the medicinal field, and the spiritual energy being emitted from the herbs, is all there to ward off the spiritual beasts and people who come after it and want to ruin it. Therefore, this medicinal field could even be said to be the safest place in the sealed dragon domain. As for that mind confusion, Feng Lian shook her head in disdain, then sneeringly said, Young Master, she is too ignorant and inexperienced, so, therefore, you might not understand. There are 2 types of herbs in the medicinal field, and once they mature, their fragrances will mix to create mind confusion and confuse a person's mind. But this kind of mind confusion is only effective on martial artists that are of gold core stage and below, and those who are mentally weak. It's not intentionally targeting us. I didn't expect that just a mere mind confusion scent would actually frighten young Master Shi. Hee. At this moment, Nie Jinshan walked forward to stand beside Feng Lian and followed up her remarks by snidely saying, Little sister Lian Ling, he's only a low-level martial artist who comes from a small place. It's only natural that he hasn't seen the world yet. There's no need for you to lower yourself for such a person. After that, he looked up at Nangongyu. Nangong, it's unlikely that you'll believe that kid over Lian Ying's judgment, right? Don't forget, she's a 6th-rank doctor. Nangongyu slightly narrowed his eyes. There was cold malice contained within his eyes, and yet the expression on his face was indifferent as he smiled lightly and said, I came to this medicinal field for Shier's sake. Since Shier said that it was unnecessary to pick them, it's fine if I don't touch any of these herbs. Then, his cold gaze swept over the bodyguards around him. Whatever young Master Shi says goes. If anyone dares question it, you better get lost from the major cloud array. As soon as he finished speaking, the bodyguards of Hell King Manor immediately shut their mouths in fear, while Feng Lian, on the other hand, was seething with anger. Nie Jinshan saw that her face was purple with rage, and he couldn't help but feel distressed. Clenching his teeth, he said, Little sister Lian, you don't have to bother about this group of cowards. I'll go now and collect the chunxiang fruit that you want. After saying that, he ruthlessly glared at Hushi, before he then turned around and walked towards the center of the medicinal field. Chapter 312, Purgatory on Earth. Soon, Nie Jinshan had picked a 5th-grade spiritual plant, a chunxiang fruit. While walking back, he aimed a provocative grin towards Hushi and the others. However, before Nie Jinshan could leave the medicinal field, he suddenly heard a shrill scream coming from behind him. Nie Jinshan instinctively turned his head around and saw the shadows of 2 people emerge from the depths of the medicinal field. Specifically, the hill which was exuding the colorful rays of light. When the 2 people neared Nie Jinshan, and he could clearly see their appearances, he immediately released a cry of, ah! It was unknown when, but the faces of the pair had been covered with blood blisters. The largest of the blood blisters were the size of grapes, while the smallest ones were the size of a woman's pinky nail. The blood blisters were squished together. Some were purple, while some were dark red. Because they were so densely packed together on her face, it made a person want to vomit at first glance. Their eyes were bloodshot, and as they ran, their hands uncontrollably scratched at their faces. This caused the blisters to pop and their faces to look like they were melting as filthy pus and watery blood streaked down their cheeks. Save me. One of them reached out his hand towards Nie Jinshan, his eyes full of pleading and fear. That hand trembled violently, and the fingertips were covered with a mix of red and white pus. In just a moment, it was about to grab onto Nie Jinshan's clothes. Nie Jinshan suddenly returned to his senses, and reacting like he'd seen a ghost, he shouted loudly and flew out of the medicinal field like a madman. The 2 people were unable to catch Nie Jinshan, so with hesitation, they changed direction and staggered towards the crowds. While they ran, they uttered wretched screams of, Save me, dash! Save me, dash! I don't want to die. All of the people standing outside the medicinal field were stunned when they saw this scene. their faces showing alarm. However, the horror was far from finished. Those who had sobered within the medicinal field because of the assembling soul fragrance abruptly fainted without warning, while the martial artists who devoured the spiritual plants whole found ugly red patches developing on their faces at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. These red patches quickly spread to cover their entire body, and there was a tendency for them to swell into blood blisters. The martial artists who had red patches spreading across their bodies continually twitched, and even though they were all in a coma, they still uttered pained groans. Their faces were contorted into expressions of agony. In the blink of an eye, the medicinal field that had just a moment ago been covered in martial artists rushing about like headless chickens had now become a scene of purgatory on earth. Nie Jinshin stared at the scene before him in horror. His face was pale, and absolute dread made his body slightly tremble. Suddenly, he came to his senses and threw away the jade box in his hand that had contained the Qianxiang fruit like a frightened deer. His expression terrified. Gu Lufeng laughed and said, "I wonder who it was that just said that this medicinal field was definitely not dangerous and that our little Yuer had never seen the world? In the end, who is that hasn't yet seen the world?" His gaze landed on Nie Jinshin's hands. Clicking his tongue, he gloated as he said, "You just touched the herb directly with your hand. You might have been infected. When the time comes for you to also have the appearance of a zombie, TSK, it's a pity about your face." Nie Jinshin was so frightened that he staggered backwards and knocked into Feng Lianing, who had just walked over. Feng Lianing covered her sore nose that had bumped into him and stared at the hellish scene of anguished wailing coming from the medicinal field, her face turning pale. Just a moment ago, she'd almost followed them into the medicinal field. If she'd been infected and had her appearance become so terrifying, just thinking of the consequences made Feng Lianying's body become cold and her breathing to become heavy. Chapter 313. Intuition. Gu Lufeng moved closer to Hushi and smiled lazily as he said, "Little Yuer, you'd long ago seen the problem with these spiritual herbs?" Hushi's expression was indifferent as she slowly nodded. However, all the bodyguards from Hell King Manor suddenly returned to their senses, and despite the fear they were all feeling, they were looking at Hushi with expressions full of gratefulness. Just now, if it weren't for their princess stopping them, they could very well have ended up with a horrific appearance too. It was no wonder that Master doted so much on Princess and was so trusting in regards to her medical skill. There were so many high-level martial artists here, and even a 5th-rank doctor. But Princess was the only person who saw through the strangeness of this medicinal field. "How did you know that there was a problem with the spiritual herbs?" a cold voice suddenly asked, interrupting everyone's arguing. It was unknown when Feng Yunjing had moved to Hushi's side, but he was now leaning his head towards her with his eyes burning as he waited for her answer. Hushi glanced at him before indifferently answering, "Intuition." This perfunctory answer caused Feng Yunjing's face to frown in anger. He hadn't expected that even though he discarded his honor to ask, Hushi would dare not to give him any face. But, in fact, Hushi didn't actually lie. When it came to the spiritual herbs within this medicinal field, whether it was color, shape, scent, or spiritual power fluctuations, they all were exactly the same as real herbs. She couldn't accurately pinpoint what was wrong with the herbs, but her doctor's natural instinct made her feel naturally sensitive towards poisonous substances. This was also coupled with Dandan's warning from her space in the beginning. "Mother, there are dangerous things here. Be careful." Therefore, she could be sure that there must be a problem with this medicinal field. The Luli sect's disciples who'd followed behind Feng Yunjing couldn't bear to see their young master being ignored in such a way, and couldn't help but scorn. So as it turns out, it wasn't because of genuine talent, but only blind luck. A fan suddenly appeared in Wu Yu's hand, and while fanning himself, he laughingly said, "I'm afraid that some people here don't even have blind luck, and yet they still think that they're amazing." Gu Lufeng promptly joined in and laughed as he said, "Exactly. And who was it that said that intuition is not a type of strength? Perhaps some of the people who are a part of a certain sect will not have the strength to bluff well enough." They both played off each other and ridiculed the Lu Li sect and Feng Lian Ying. When the disciples of Lu Li's sect heard such mocking words, they were filled with indignation. Nie Jinchen was even more incensed and started cursing, Gu Lu Feng, don't fucking pretend to know what's best. Do any of you have the qualifications to slander little sister Lian Ying and the Lu Li sect? Do you think that I won't kill you? Wu Yu waved the fan as he chuckled. Oh, so you're going to kill people to silence them? I'm so scared. I wonder who it was that was just in the major cloud array, asking my master not to kill them. Since eating Hushi's delicious food, Wu Yu had firmly established the principle of unwaveringly holding the princess's words on a high pedestal. If Princess were to ever argue with his master, he would undoubtedly support Princess to the end. Yeah, everything is worth it for food. Gu Lufeng saw Feng Lian Ying's extremely unsightly face and sneered. Which one our words was slanderous? Wasn't it because of your Lu Li sect's ice lotus fairy that more people lost consciousness? At that time, many martial artists had entered the medicinal field and fallen unconscious because of Feng Lian Ying's assembling soul fragrance. Feng Yunjing glanced at Wu Yu, then looked at Nan Gongyu, a corner of his mouth rising slightly. How come I was unaware that the servants from Hell King Manor could be so uncontrolled? Chapter 314. Ice Lotus Fairy, save me. Nangongyu's expression was indifferent, and he carelessly said, he's new and still doesn't understand the rules. Yunjing, you don't have to bother about him. At this moment, Wu Yu was disguised as an ordinary bodyguard. But where was there a bodyguard who had enough guts to provoke the Feng family? This, together with Nangongyu's cold attitude. Feng Yunjing clearly understood that he was being lied to. Wu Yu wanted to say something more, but Qing Long stepped forward and lightly pressed his hand down on Wu Yu's shoulder, shaking his head at him. Now was not the time to cause trouble with the Lu Li sect. Otherwise, all of their master's previous work would be ruined. Wu Yu curled his lip as he closed his mouth and didn't say anything further. At this moment, the two men who had appeared with blood blisters and pus dripping down their bodies started crawling away from the medicinal field. As soon as they saw Feng Lian Ying, their eyes lit up and they staggered towards her. Wherever they went, the other martial artists avoided them as if they were poisonous snakes. Feng Lian Ying also wanted to run away, but because of her fear, her feet failed to move. Ice Lotus Fairy, save us dash. Wretched shouts resounded throughout the medicinal field. The two men plopped to the ground to kneel in front of Feng Lian Ying, hissing in pain as they yelled, I'm the master of the Morong family, Morong Zhangfeng. My Morong family has always been on peaceful terms with the Lu Li sect. I beg you, please save us. As soon as the words left his mouth, everyone couldn't help but be surprised. These two people covered in blood blisters who couldn't be recognized unexpectedly turned out to be the master of the Morong family, Morong Zhangfeng, someone from one of the four major families of Yanjing City. The other was Morong Zhangfeng's father, the elder of Morong Manor, Morong Hai, Yanjing City's famous third-rank doctor. These two people suddenly threw themselves before Feng Lian Ying, their fingers stretching to touch her delicate hand, their pus and blood-covered hands already clutching her snow-white clothes. Feng Lian Ying was so terrified that her complexion lost all color, turning a sickly pale as she stepped back several paces. Her eyes were full of horror and disgust. Feng Yunjing, who was watching from the side, frowned when he heard the two people reveal their identities and asked, How did you end up like this? Seeing that the person questioning them was the young master of the Feng family. Feng Yunjing, how could they dare to delay answering? Enduring the acute pain racking their bodies and the fear in their hearts, they quickly told the whole story. It turned out that the Morong family had been the first people to enter the medicinal field through the major cloud array. When they had first entered the medicinal field, they'd also discovered that there was the scent of mind confusion in the air that could cause a person to lose their mind. However, the Morong family had Morong Hai with them, a third-rank doctor. Therefore, they were naturally unafraid of such a trifling poison. As soon as the mind confusion scent had been removed, they began to collect the herbs within the field. There were countless fifth-grade spiritual plants within the medicinal field, and later, When someone noticed the hill that was glowing with colorful rays of light, they found sixth-grade spiritual plants that could make one go insane with greed. But just as the Morong family were ecstatic, people from their group began to faint and become feverish. No matter how much Morong Hai examined them, he couldn't discover why they'd fallen unconscious. What's worse was that the red rash began to spread on the faces of the unconscious people. The red rash grew at a speed that was visible to the naked eye before they then turned into giant blood blisters. These blood blisters growing on their bodies were extremely itchy, so itchy that even people with sharp minds couldn't help but scratch. Unfortunately, even if you didn't scratch at them, after a while, the blisters would still pop and turn into a horribly bloody mess. Once the blood blisters began to burst, the person's skin and internal organs would start rotting until they died. Chapter 315. Distraught Gu Lufeng recalling the experiences of the past half an hour. Morong Zhangfeng's eyes were full of fear and despair. He didn't dare look at his own hands and feet, and he avoided even thinking about what his face looked like. He could only place all his hopes on Ice Lotus Fairy. Everyone knew that Ice Lotus Fairy was an intermediate member of the Doctors Association, and that she was also one of the best 5th-ranked doctors found on Mi Luo continent. We of the Morong family entered the medicinal field with 29 people, but now there are only 2 of us who are still alive. The others are all dead. They're all dead. We don't want to die. Young Master Feng, please let Ice Lotus Fairy save us. Your Feng family's great kindness, our Morong family will certainly repay back 100-fold in the future. Of the 29 people, only 2 had survived. Fear was visible on everyone's face. Did that mean that all those unconscious martial artists in the medicinal field will die too? Hushi and the others had initially been observing the development of things quietly, but then the Morong family had said that. Gu Liufeng's body suddenly started trembling before he then stormed forward without warning and fiercely glared at Morong Zhangfeng. You just said that everyone else is dead? Then what about Gui Dao? Didn't he come in with you? Morong Zhangfeng looked at him, and his eyes flashed, his expression quickly morphing into one of loss as he wailed, "Dead. He's dead." Gu Liufeng's lips slightly parted as his eyes filled with shock and horror. He stood blankly, his lifeless expression changing into one of hatred as he looked down at Morong Zhangfeng. A raging flame burned in his eyes as if he was ready to mutilate him. Abruptly, he turned around and rushed towards the medicinal field. Fortunately, Wu Yu's hands moved faster, and he rushed over and grabbed him. Are you crazy? Don't you see what they look like once they enter the field? Aren't you afraid that you'll become like them too? Don't you want to live anymore? Don't bother about me. Gu Lufeng roared like a trapped beast, his body violently struggling. I have to save him. Whether I live or die has nothing to do with you. Gu Lufeng was a peak gold core stage martial artist, so in regards to his power, he was still higher than Wu Yu. How would Wu Yu be able to stop him? So, letting go, he watched as Gu Lufeng recklessly charged towards the medicinal field. Seeing that Gu Lufeng had lost his mind, Hushi frowned. Although she had only known Gu Lufeng for a short time, he had always been calm, graceful, and relaxed. She had never seen such a distraught Gu Lufeng before. It seemed that this Gu Yidao was extremely important to him. Hushi pulled on Nangong Yu's sleeve, whispered a few words in his ear, and then slipped him a small bottle of medicine. A corner of Nangong Yu's mouth twitched, reluctance written all over his face. Sheer, you're so concerned about that kid, yet I haven't seen you be that good to me. Seeing Hushi glaring at him, he could only ignore his jealousy. Leaning close to Hushi's ear, he softly whispered, I can listen to your words and help him. However, you have to reward me later, Sheer. Without waiting for Hushi to respond, his figure had already disappeared, while Gu Lufeng, who had just reached the edge of the medicinal field, suddenly felt pressure like Mount Tai pressing down on him. Just as he was about to fight against it, Nangong Yu suddenly reached out and poured the medicine from the bottle into Gu Liufeng's slightly parted mouth. Spiritual energy began to swiftly fill the air, and the medicine instantly spread throughout his body. Gu Lufeng felt his eyes blurring before he then lost consciousness. Chapter 316. Last hope. Ningongyu grabbed Gu Liufeng's collar and dragged him back like a small chicken, throwing him in front of Hushi. Then, leaning close to her, he softly whispered, "Reward." Hushi remained silent. Looking over, she saw him with his face turned to the side and staring at her with a look which explicitly demanded that she kisses him. Hushi immediately turned away. Ningongyu wasn't annoyed. Instead, he took her into his arms and lightly pecked her on a corner of her mouth, and then with a husky voice, he whispered in her ear, "Princess refused to take the initiative and reward me, so I had to collect it for myself. I had to exert myself and make an effort. I can't lose it all." "Scoundrel!" Hushi fiercely glared at him, then turned her head away and refused to look at him. However, both of her cheeks were bright crimson. Feng Yunjing saw this scene from where he was standing, and his expression suddenly became gloomy. A cold aura, like a poisonous snake, seemed to circulate within his deep eyes. "Ah!" Suddenly, an ear-piercing scream came from within the medicinal field. The martial artist who'd been unconscious in the medicinal field abruptly started to awaken, one after the other. But the red rash on everyone's faces had morphed into red and purple blood blisters, some people's blisters seeming to grow faster than others. In a moment, the blood blisters continued to swell and then pop. Next, yellow-red blood flowed down their bodies. Their appearances were even more horrible than the evil spirits that crawled out of hell. The faces of everyone standing outside the medicinal field were full of fear, and they quickly rushed backwards. Some of those who had small guts and a weak tolerance had already started wailing while rushing to the side and vomiting. The medicinal field before their eyes was like a scene of hell on earth. Abruptly, a person whose whole body was decaying, his original appearance unrecognizable, rushed while stumbling towards Feng Lianying. He kneeled down in front of Feng Lianying, hissing and wailing, "Ice Lotus Fairy, save me! I'm Shangguan Rue. You can break the mind confusion scent. You must have a way to heal us. You're also the direct disciple of Thousand Venom Valley's master. No one in the world can save us except for you. I'm begging you." When Shangguan Rue said this, everyone in the medicinal field who had been filled with despair suddenly latched onto those words as their last hope. People immediately surged towards Feng Lianying like a tide and shouted, "Ice Lotus Fairy, save us!" These people were currently unaware of how horrible their appearances were at this moment. Moreover, even after having been alive for so many years, none of them had ever seen such a terrible illness before. Now, they all had the appearances of zombies. It was almost like they'd been sentenced to the death penalty. However, while no one really wanted to die, they also didn't want to live as they were either. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, they would hang on to it at all costs. What's more, who in all of Luo continent didn't know of Ice Lotus Fairy's reputation? At such a young age, she was already a 5th-ranked doctor, an intermediate-level member of the Doctors Association, and a direct disciple of Thousand Venom Valley's master. With her here, maybe they still had a chance. No, with Ice Lotus Fairy here, they would undoubtedly be saved. Feng Lianying saw all of their sinister and disgusting faces, and the fear and loathing in her heart reached extreme levels. She felt like the air was filled with a fishy smell, making her itch to kick these nauseating people away. However, it was at this moment that Wu Yu waved his fan and raised his voice as he said, "Everyone can rest assured. Ice Lotus Fairy has the heart of a bodhisattva, kind and charitable. When everyone is suffering so terribly, how could she just bear watching? Not to mention, her medical skills are excellent, and she has a crucial position in the Doctors Association. Naturally, she can find a way to heal you. If even this cannot be done, wouldn't she be ruining her name as Ice Lotus Fairy?" Chapter 317. Recognized medical genius. As soon as these words were said, the eyes of those who were kneeling on the ground and begging Feng Lianying revealed their hope. Feng Lianying's face was still pale, and her heart was full of disgust as she looked at these people. However, Wu Yu's words filled her with a high sense of vanity. That's right. She was a rare medical genius that appears once every few centuries in Luo continent. Whether it was in alchemy or healing, she was much better than the unskilled trash who relied on treacherous methods to profit once or twice. Although these martial artists were disgusting, most of them had extraordinary backgrounds. If she could cure these people in full view of everyone, her prestige in Miluo continent and her position in her family would be significantly enhanced. And in the end, brother, you would clearly know who was truly outstanding and deserving of matching him. Feng Lianying's gaze couldn't help but look at Nangongyu, yet he didn't see her at all. Instead, he bent his head and spoke with Hushi, acting as if there was nobody else present. Feng Lianying was so angry that her face was distorted, while both of her hands were clenched tightly into fists. Humph! She'll let brother you see that she was the best person, and that only she was worthy of the position of Princess of Hell King Manor. With these thoughts, Feng Lianying stepped forward and was about to boast about her medical skills. However, she abruptly heard Feng Yunjing's cold voice say, "Are you sure that you can cure these people? If you're not, then don't show off and lose face for our Feng family." The arrogant look on Feng Lianying's face suddenly transformed into anger. Although her voice was deliberately lower, it was still a bit sharp as she said, "Big brother, you believe that slut, but you don't believe me? Don't forget, I'm a 5th-rank doctor that's recognized as a medical genius under the heavens. Not to mention, big brother, you seem to have forgotten what kind of person my master is, Thousand Venom Valley's master. What kind of poisons haven't I seen before?" Feng Yunjing indifferently glanced at her. "You're certain that you can help them?" Feng Lianying's eyes flashed, and gritting her teeth, she said, "Big brother, don't worry. I've just remembered this illness, and I've seen it in Master's book, the 1000 Poison Record. I clearly recall that there was a solution in there." Feng Lianying spoke with perfect confidence, so it made Feng Yunjing somewhat believe in her. Since this was the case, he retreated several steps and didn't say anything more. If Feng Lianying really had a way to cure this group of people, it'll mean that these people or their masters would all owe a favor to the Feng family. Feng Yunjing would naturally be glad for such an outcome. As Feng Lianying finished speaking, she quickly stepped forward. Her first move was to head towards Shangguan Rue, the 3rd prince of Jinling Kingdom. When Feng Lianying saw the man's face covered in blood blisters and pus, her eyes filled with disgust. In contrast, the look on her face was very kind, gentle, and filled with compassion. "Your Highness 3rd Prince, please rest assured. I will definitely save you all." As soon as she stated this, the surrounding martial artists immediately burst into an enthusiastic cheer. Whether it was the people infected or those just watching, they all kowtowed in gratitude and praised Feng Lianying as a living Buddha. A haughty and pleased smile hung on Feng Lianying's face as her beautiful eyes swept over everyone. "Lianying is also a part of the cultivation world, so I naturally can't see anyone die without trying to save them. This is my Feng family's constant purpose. You don't have to thank me." After that, she pointed to the martial artist who was still unconscious in the medicinal field. "I'll have to trouble everyone to bring those who are not yet awake and those unable to move in the medicinal field, and place them together in one area." Chapter 318. Kindly remind them, of course, no one could enter the medicinal field. So after thinking for a minute, the martial artists all summoned tools such as whips, long ropes, and so on, to pull over those in the medicinal field. After these people had pulled over those who were ill from the medicinal field, 2 or 3 more people would carry the ill to a cleared area. The whole time the martial artists were doing this, they were aiming flattering smiles towards Feng Lianying. Hushi couldn't help raising a corner of her mouth and revealing a mysterious smile. Suddenly, Nangongyu leaned over to her ear and softly whispered, "If there's something funny, then you better tell me. Let your husband be happy too?" Hushi glanced at him, too lazy to correct his stupid way of addressing himself, and chuckled. "Guess yourself." Nangongyu reached out his hand to poke the tip of her nose, his tone full of affection as he said, "Cheeky. If I guess correctly, then what are you going to give me as a reward?" Wanting another reward. This guy was having too much fun playing around with her. He'll become addicted. Hushi shoved his hand away, then unhappily said, "In your dreams." However, Nangongyu abruptly leaned closer to her ear again, and with a quiet voice slowly said, "This king guesses that the poison will not only infect the ones entering the medicinal field, but those who come into contact with the infected." Hearing that, Hushi couldn't help laughing. She had absolutely no sympathy as she watched those enthusiastic martial artists try to curry favor with Feng Ling. Instead, she smirked and said, "Yeah, I wonder if they'll still praise Ice Lotus Fairy after they find out that they've also been poisoned." Nangongyu saw the playful smile on the corners of Hushi's mouth, the waves of light swirling in her eyes, and smelled her fragrance. Next, his eyes were drawn to her crafty smile, especially those pink and soft lips with her pearly white teeth. Nangongyu could feel his heart swelling, so reaching out, he took her into his embrace. Then, using one of his wide sleeves to block everyone's line of sight, he kissed her. After a long while, Hushi fiercely pushed him away. Her soft pink lips were slightly red and swollen as she glared angrily at him, her eyes rippling with emotions. "What are you doing when we're in a public place?" Nangongyu gently ran a finger across her long eyelashes, smiling as he said, "Haven't I said it before? This king never makes a losing transaction. Rewards I'm owed must be claimed." Just before Hushi was about to get angry, Nangongyu promptly changed the topic with a two-faced smile on his face. "What do you think? Should we kindly remind them?" Hushi was startled at the sudden change in topic and stared blankly at first. Then her eyes swiftly swept over everyone from the Luli sect before she laughed. Nangongyu was worse than her. However, she rather liked such a personality very much. Under Nangongyu's gaze, Wu Yu quickly started blabbering nonstop. He shouted at the group of people who were carrying the sick people, "Tisk tsk, that blackish blood is so disgusting. Since you've all touched it directly, aren't you afraid your bodies will stink too?" One of them, following Feng Lianying's instructions and meticulously taking care of their clothes, immediately raised his head and answered back sarcastically, "Saving a life is more important than one's belongings." Ice Lotus Fairy doesn't hesitate to use her spiritual power and her precious medicinal pills to save them, but yet you actually still care about being dirty. If you have a heart of stone like this when seeing those who are about to die and have no inclination to save them, it's simply not worth you living in this world. Right? Those people don't even deserve to carry Ice Lotus Fairy's shoes. You guys clearly don't understand what a noble character is and what it is to dedicate your life to a worthwhile cause. Voices continuously echoed throughout the medicinal field, making Hushi, who heard it, almost laugh. If these people weren't dressed in ancient attire, she would have thought that she'd returned to the assassin organization of her past life. "But, young Master Shi, you obviously knew yet you didn't say it. For what purpose? Are the lives of these 100-odd people less important to you than your personal grudge?" After Feng Lianing spoke, everyone suddenly looked at Hushi with gazes full of contempt and resentment, especially those people whose friends and relatives had fallen unconscious. They didn't even know if they themselves were infected or not, so they felt even more hatred towards Hushi. They had all drawn out their long swords as they itched to rush forwards and kill her. Wu Yu was simply amazed at Feng Lianying's ability to deliberately distort the truth. Previously, he was unaware of why Gu Lufeng and his princess hated Feng Lianing so much. After all, he'd only met Feng Lianing a few times. Yet, he also knew that she liked his own master. But now, he'd seen the reason. She was a treacherous and vicious woman. She was simply too shameless. Then, a flash of understanding lit up her eyes and a corner of her mouth raised in a proud smile. After the examination, she was confident that her guess was correct. What these people were suffering from was a strange poison recorded in her master's book, the 1,000 Poison Record. Her fingers waved once more, and the people watching were dazzled as the spiritual power that had entered Shangguan Rui's body returned to Feng Lianing. This gorgeous movement caused everyone's admiration of Feng Lianing to increase. Their eyes were brimming with hope and expectation as they looked at her. After Feng Lianing retrieved her spiritual power, she revealed a confident smile and slowly said, "I have a diagnosis of your condition. It's a poison called intoxicated blood, which is an incredibly rare and strange poison. It normally only appears in the desert of the far north, so I don't know why it would appear in 100 herb mist. However, please rest assured that I already know what the cure to this poison is. The antidote is a 5 elements blood coagulation pill made from purple monkey flowers, pomegranate firefruit, and dragon grass. The herbs needed for this kind of medicine are extremely unique and hard to find in the world. Fortunately, I have plenty 5 elements blood coagulation pills refined by my master, so I'm now able to detoxify the poison in everyone's bodies. Chapter 321. Are you Gui Dao? Feng Lianying's face was full of arrogance and pride as her delicate hands slowly fished out a bottle of medicine. Then, she poured out a 5 elements blood coagulation pill and gave it to Shangguan Rue. In less time than it takes to burn a stick of incense, Shangguan Rue, who'd initially been on the verge of dying, had started to regain his vitality. His body that had been festering, with pus continuously flowing down it like a stream, slowly stopped rotting. Even the pus-filled wounds started closing. Shangguan Rue's face was filled with joy. He had miraculously managed to return from death's door. Kneeling in front of Feng Lianying, he said with a trembling voice, I feel my spiritual power gradually coming back, and the burning like pain in my internal organs is also slowly disappearing. Ice Lotus Fairy, your medical skills are really unparalleled. I, Shangguan Rue, will never forget your kindness. As he uttered those words, an enthusiastic cheer burst forth from the crowd. One by one, they all yelled, Ice Lotus Fairy, and they gazed at her like they were looking at a goddess delivering salvation. They were all filled with admiration and gratefulness. When Hushi saw this scene before her, she couldn't help but laugh lightly at Nangong Yu's side. Look at how your little sister Lianing is worshipped. It seems like she still has an infatuation with you two. All this time, she hasn't once forgotten to cast flirtatious glances towards you, yet you aren't moved at all. Such a heartless little girl. Nangong Yu reached out his hand and pinched her elegant little nose, unhappily saying, Who's my little sister Lianing? In this world, there's only a Nalan Hushi who's mine, understand? In the future, if you say something incorrectly again, then don't blame this king for punishing you. Hushi's face was bright red as she swat his misbehaving hand away, and she wanted to pay him back. Suddenly, she heard an exclamation from a Hell King Manor bodyguard. Master, young Master Shi, look at that. It looks like someone is approaching. From the direction of the hill, there were 2 silhouettes unexpectedly staggering towards them. The faces of these 2 men were also covered in blood blisters. It was a horrible sight to behold. One of them hadn't even made it out of the medicinal field before he fell to the ground and howled with grief, never to get up again. The other man ran out of the medicinal field while swaying from side to side, incessantly shouting, Help! However, when the man's eyes fell on the unconscious form of Gu Lufeng, he seemed to have forgotten all his pain and fear, and his screams were now full of worry. Lufeng W., what happened to you? Seeing that the man was about to charge towards Gu Lufeng, the bodyguards of Hell King Manor used their long swords to block his way threateningly. The man looked up in alarm and saw a group of people staring at him coldly. He couldn't help trembling as he asked, who are you people? What did you do to Lufeng? Yu waved his fan, arrogantly looking at him as he asked, And who are you? What is your relationship with Gu Lufeng? Don't you know that if you get close to him, you will infect him with the poison on your body? The man's eyes filled with fear and despair. The blood blisters on his face were even starting to pop one after another, causing his entire face to look horrifying. Hushi suddenly frowned. Are you Gui Dao? How do you know my name? Hushi didn't say anything more. Instead, squatting down, she took out a bottle of medicine and waved it under Gu Liufeng's nose. Gu Liufeng's brows creased tightly, and he quickly awoke. However, he had barely returned to consciousness, and before he could adjust his energy and restore his physical strength, he immediately shouted, Let me go. Let me go save him. I don't believe that he's dead. Wu Yu patted Gu Liufeng's shoulder to appease him and said, "First, calm down. Do you see who this person is?" Chapter 322. The Beginning of a Nightmare. Lu Lufeng. Are you okay? Gu Yidao's voice was hoarse, and he kept releasing painful groans. Fortunately, you're all right at least. There's someone who'll take care of you, Lan. Gu Lufeng looked at the man lying on the ground, barely able to recognize his face. After staring blankly for a few minutes, he finally whispered back, Your uncle? You didn't die?" As he said that, Gu Lufeng went to rush towards him, only to be stopped by Hushi. "Don't touch him. You'll be infected." Hearing that his poison really was contagious to Gu Lufeng, Gu Yidao propped himself up with his hand on the ground and moved backwards several steps before he cried sorrowfully, "Lufeng, uncle. Uncle is already past the point of helping. Don't come over. In the future, take good care of your mother and live well. Uncle, don't talk nonsense." Gu Lufeng suddenly raised his voice. "You've just been poisoned by an insignificant and strange poison. Why would you die? Didn't I tell you to leave Murong Zhangfeng and them behind when you entered the secret territory and to wait for me in Greenwood Realm? Why didn't you listen to me and instead followed them into 100 Herb Mist?" Gu Yidao's eyes were somewhat blank before they then filled with fear and pain. In the end, he just lightly sighed and said, "I was in too much of a rush." Gu Yidao's younger sister, Gu Yulan, who was also Gu Liufeng's mother, was seriously ill. After having received treatment for so many years, she still showed no signs of recovery. Instead, she was gradually reaching her limit. Gu Lufeng and Gu Yidao were desperate and had decided to take a chance on the secret territory of the Sealed Dragon Domain. After all, the owner of the Sealed Dragon Domain, Master Zijin, was once a person with an outstanding reputation regarding his medical skills. Furthermore, 100 Herb Mist was filled with high-level spiritual plants rare to the Luo continent. Gu Yidao was a gold core stage martial artist and a bodyguard of Morong Manor. This, together with a map of the secret territory he had in his possession that was handed down from generation to generation, he was able to enter 100 Herb Mist through the major cloud array. After arriving at Greenwood Realm, Gu Yidao hadn't been able to wait until Gu Lufeng arrived, and had followed the Morong family into the medicinal field. Once they all saw the endless amount of high-level spiritual plants in the medicinal field, they were nearly overcome with madness. However, some of the people who couldn't help but consume those herbs found that afterwards, their bodies were covered in a strange red rash. Gu Yidao gazed at the medicinal field, the expression in his eyes becoming one of terror and anger. Back then, half of the 29 people we came in with showed symptoms of being poisoned. But at that time, no one panicked because we had Morong Hai with us, a third-rank doctor. He gave everyone an elixir, and after taking the medicine, everyone's temperature quickly went down. On top of that, the red rashes disappeared without a trace. We all thought that that was the end of our trouble, but who would have thought that it was just the beginning of our nightmare? Gu Yidao clenched his teeth, then continued. Not long after taking the medicine, the martial artists who'd originally had the red rashes suddenly began to bleed from the 7 apertures, one, of their faces. Eventually, their bodies were completely rotten, until they were nothing but pools of blood. Unfortunately, our nightmare was far from over. After half of them had died, the rest of us, besides Morong Hai and Morong Zhangfeng, also started to experience the symptoms of a fever. Now, it's definite that we were infected due to coming into contact with those who were poisoned. When Gu Yidao said that, an extremely pained expression crossed his face, and his body twitched violently. The blood blisters on his face were festering with a speed visible to the naked eye, while black and yellow bloody pus leaked out from his body. His current appearance was horrendous. This appearance was due to Gu Yidao suffering from the final stages of the poison. Soon, he would meet with a violent death. 1. Both eyes, both nostrils, both ears, and the mouth. Chapter 323. Ridicule. However, he continuously kept shouting at Gu Lufeng, "Don't come near me. Live well. Lufeng, live well. The inside of Gu Liufeng's mask had long since become damp with tears. Regardless of everything, he still wanted to shake off Wu Yu and rush over to his uncle. However, Hushi was faster than him and scattered a handful of white powder into the air. The white powder landed on Gu Yidao's body, and soon, it was absorbed into his flesh. Though the wound showed no change, Gu Yidao's painful wailing silenced, and his body stopped twitching. Hushi looked at Gu Lufeng and indifferently said, "This powder can only temporarily stop the poison from invading his heart. It won't last long." Gu Lufeng stared blankly at Hushi. Then he suddenly fell to his knees. "Shiyu, can you save him? As long as you save him, my life is yours." Hushi's expression was somewhat grave, and while her voice came out indifferently cold like normal, it had a slight calming effect. "Even if I can save him, my method of healing people is different compared to other doctors. Moreover, it's extremely likely that your uncle will suffer from a great amount of pain. Even then, do you still want me to save him?" But before Gu Lufeng could answer, a soft voice interrupted. "Young Master Gu, I hope you won't take offense, but you can take one of my 5 elements blood coagulation pills for your uncle." Gu Lufeng turned around and saw Feng Lianying looking back at him with a smile spread across her face. Feng Lianying's expression was filled with arrogance, as if she was enjoying watching other people's misfortune. Slightly raising her chin, she said, "Previously, it was young Master Gu who injured me, but it was only because Shiyu bewitched you. I believe that it wasn't intentional. As long as you're willing to sincerely repent, I will naturally save your uncle's life. After all, saving a life is the noble thing to do, and on top of that, I don't want to see you heartbroken. How does that sound?" Standing beside Feng Lianying, Nie Jinshun couldn't help but laugh as he said, "Gu Lufeng, you can't really think that everyone has little sister Lianying's strength and will be capable of saving your uncle's life, right? Don't make the wrong choice and cause harm to your uncle. You'll regret it all your life. If you have any self-consciousness left, then obediently come here and apologize by kowtowing to little sister Lianying. After that, we will kindly help you. How about it?" Feng Lianying glanced at Nie Jingchen, as if she was trying to censure him, then slowly said, "Maybe young master she really does have a way to cure people? Although he's just on foundation establishment stage and doesn't have a doctor's rank." Nie Jingchen burst into laughter and said, "As if that waste has a way to cure people. He's just talking rubbish. Now that he sees that you, little sister Lianying, have the limelight, he's unsatisfied. There's no need for you to defend such a vicious person. That's right. How can trash that would be so daring as to deceive everyone be compared with Ice Lotus Fairy? This young master, if you really want to save your uncle, you'd better come and apologize to Ice Lotus Fairy. Really, all kinds of trash are daring to impersonate being a doctor nowadays. This kind of person is simply not even worthy of carrying Ice Lotus Fairy's shoes." One after another, comments were shouted through the medicinal field. Everyone was ridiculing Hushi for overestimating her capabilities. Hushi stopped Nangongyu, who was filled with rage and ready to teach them a lesson, and coldly laughed as she whispered in his ear. Nangongyu stared blankly. Then, following that, he poked the tip of her nose and laughed with an indulging expression on his face. At this moment, Feng Lianying saw the interaction between the two of them, and her face twisted in fury. After a few deep breaths, she managed to restrain her rage and said, "Young Master Gu, have you thought it over? In just a few minutes it'll be too difficult to save your uncle." Chapter 324. I believe in you, or will you kill your uncle for your selfishness? Gu Lufeng closed his eyes, and when they opened again, they were calm and tranquil. "I've made my decision." Nie Jinchen laughed and said, "Since you've thought about it, why don't you hurry up and kowtow to little sister Lianying, acknowledging your mistake?" However, before Nie Jinchen could finish speaking, Gu Lufeng had already stood up. Then, looking straight at Hushi, he slowly said, "Please, cure my uncle." Hushi raised an eyebrow, and a glint of surprise flashed in her eyes. "Have you properly considered everything? I don't have a doctor's rank, and I'm not a member of the Doctors' Association." Without the slightest hesitation, Gu Lufeng responded, "I believe in you." Looking at this scene, Nie Jinshin's words of humiliation and ridicule seemed to be stuck in his throat. His entire face was flushed red, and it was a long while before he exclaimed, "Gu Lufeng, are you insane? You actually believe that lying stinky brat who doesn't have any achievements? After you cause your uncle's death, you'll regret this decision." The faces of the other people in the medicinal field were all showing their disapproval, and they gazed at Gu Lufeng like they were looking at an idiot. This man would rather reject Ice Lotus Fairy, a 5th-rank doctor, and instead chose to believe a boy only on Foundation establishment stage. Seeing the resolute gaze of Gu Lufeng, a corner of Hushi's mouth lifted into a slight smirk. "In that case, then I need you go into the medicinal field to pick up some herbs such as purple monkey flower, pomegranate firefruit, and dragon grass." As soon as she said this, everyone was in an uproar. My God, did I just hear it correctly? Did he just say to pick herbs from the medicinal field? Doesn't he know those herbs are poisonous and that whoever eats them will die? This is what saving people looks like? It's clearly wanting to kill people. Not to mention, the herbs he just named are the same ones as Ice Lotus Fairy. This clearly means that he doesn't understand anything. He's just copying the diagnosis and prescription of Ice Lotus Fairy. This guy is just too shameless. The surrounding was filled with noise, yet Hushi's expression didn't change in the slightest. She merely watched Gu Lufeng with a relaxed gaze. Gu Lufeng looked at his uncle, who was now unconscious yet still groaning, and clenched his teeth as he said, "Okay, I'll go." Insane. This guy must be insane. Entering the medicinal field is equal to courting death. Did that beautiful boy deceive him? How could he make such a decision? I know about the one who wears the mask. He's the boss of Shengda Hall, young Master Gu. With his shrewd intelligence, how could he unequivocally believe the boy's words yet not believe in Ice Lotus Fairy to help? Perhaps he was seduced by the boy's pretty face, so he doesn't even care about his uncle's safety. Ha ha ha. Gu Lufeng angrily grit his teeth, and in a flash, he entered the medicinal field. He was a person who ran a pharmacy, so even though some herbs such as purple monkey flower, pomegranate firefruit, and dragon grass were uncommon, he could still recognize them easily. Soon, he had used jade boxes to hold a lot of these 3 kinds of herbs and brought them in front of Hushi. When he came out of the medicinal field, Gu Liufeng's forehead was covered in fine layer of sweat, but his gaze was extremely resolute. At this time, Feng Lianying's concerned voice was heard from afar. "Young Master Gu, since you entered the medicinal field, it's very likely that you've already been infected with the intoxicated blood poison. You should quickly take one of my 5 elements blood coagulation pills. I don't want you to kowtow and admit your mistake. I just hope that you and your uncle stay alive. After all, we're doctors. We must have benevolent hearts and be charitable in deeds. How could I act like young Master Shi and treat a patient's life as a trifling matter in order to show off?" Chapter 325. Domineering Behavior. Feng Lianying thought that her words were reasonable, refined, and full of integrity. The martial artists nearby who were unaware of her true thoughts expressed their approval. Ice Lotus Fairy really is as kind-hearted as the rumors say. She's such a compassionate person. Ice Lotus Fairy must have been sent from the 9th heaven. She came to deliver us salvation. That brat has no medical ethics. With the way he disregards human life, he shouldn't be allowed to leave the medicinal field alive. Feng Lianying felt like her body was emitting a holy light, and looked down at Gu Lufeng with pity. However, she hadn't expected that Gu Lufeng would merely glance coldly at her, and without a trace of politeness, say, "Life and death are determined by fate. There's no need for Ice Lotus Fairy's concern. Not to mention, I feel nauseous just from looking at such a loathsome woman like you, who acts like a white lotus on the outside but is rotten on the inside. If I had to be saved by you, I would rather die in little Yuer's hands." After that, he turned his head away and wholly ignored Feng Lianying. Feng Lianying was shaking all over due to her rage. As she looked at Hushi and Gu Lufeng, her gaze filled with her desire to kill them and crush their bones into dust. At this time, after receiving the herbs, Hushi didn't refine them into medicine as everyone expected. Rather, after releasing a strange ball of fire spiritual power, she then began to directly roast the herbs. As the fire spiritual power burned the 3 herbs, the spiritual energy within the spiritual plants began to slowly be absorbed by the fire spiritual power. With the herbs starting to melt, the originally fresh and tender herbs soon dried up to resemble stalks of grass. What is he doing? He's actually sucked the spiritual energy out of the herbs. What effect will be left in the herbs if he does that? He's obviously pretending to know what he's doing. He wanted to imitate Ice Lotus Fairy and save people, but he's unable to refine even the most basic medicine. Now he's lost face. Even if there is a problem with the herbs in this medicinal field, doing things like this to the herbs is too wasteful. That kind of person thinks he deserves to be called a doctor? How can young Master Gu believe him? Hushi turned a deaf ear to everything around her. With the help of Gu Lufeng and Wu Yu, she quickly produced a medicinal liquid. After decocting the herbs, Hushi came to stand beside Gu Yidao. The silver needles in her hand flew like shadows and pierced several of Gu Yidao's major acupuncture points. As the silver needles entered Gu Yidao's acupuncture points, spiritual power began to leak from his body. Gu Yidao's body that had been originally weak, at this moment, due to the loss of spiritual power, weakened until the breaths leaving his mouth were like dying gasps. Seeing his uncle's weak appearance, he eventually couldn't help asking, "Shiyu, my uncle, can he be saved?" Currently, Hushi was confirming whether Gu Yidao's spiritual power was drained. Having heard what was asked, she laughed proudly and slowly said, "There is no end to the medical techniques I can use, but I don't dare to say that I can cure all the world's ailments. Yet, if I say that I can cure someone, then even if it's King Yama, he won't be taking their life. And you guys," her gaze landed on Gu Lufeng, Wu Yu, and Qinglong. "It would be enough if all of you just shut up." Gu Lufeng, Wu Yu, Qinglong, Wu Yu and Qinglong. Princess is too domineering. She's really a perfect match for Master. Nangong Yu caressed Hushi's hair, lightly chuckling as he said, "This king likes such domineering behavior. She really is worthy of being the woman this king fancies." Hushi responded to him with 2 efficient words. "Get lost, dash." The perfectly concocted medicinal liquid was soon poured into Gu Yidao's mouth, and after he drank the medicine, his expression suddenly twisted into one of extreme pain. His body, which was already weak, suddenly twitched violently on the ground. Gu Yidao's skin, which was initially only slightly festering, not only didn't heal, it instead started sprouting blackish blood blisters. Chapter 326, Believe in him to the end. For a moment, only Gu Yidao's ear-piercing screams could be heard throughout the medicinal field, drowning out the cries of the other infected people. Everyone was silent while they looked at Gu Yidao's miserable appearance. Their faces were covered in horror and sympathy. Then, such silence was only momentary, as soon the medicinal field broke out into even more emotional discussions than before. "It's awful. Fortunately, it's not that brat that'll treat us, but Ice Lotus Fairy. Otherwise, we'll end up like that too. Yeah, he obviously could have been saved before, but now, his life. Who told young Master Gu to not believe Ice Lotus Fairy, but to believe in that kid who has yet to mature? I wonder if he's happy now that his uncle has been killed. A quack. He's a quack that harms people." The anger from those watching was like a tide that rose and fell in continuous succession, and as it mixed with Gu Yidao's pained howls, it caused Gu Liufeng's hands to clench into tight fists at his sides. He couldn't bear to watch his uncle suffer through such torment, but reason told him to trust Shiyu. Since he'd promised to believe in him, he must believe in him to the end. Gu Lufeng closed his eyes, his complexion deathly pale as his body trembled slightly. The one person in the medicinal field that wasn't affected by the screaming was probably only Hushi. Her expression was calm as she asked Nangongyu for a length of heaven silk, and then used it to tie Gu Yidao up to prevent him from further struggling. Then, she took out her silver needles and crouching down, popped the black blood blisters on Gu Yidao's body one by one. The black liquid slowly seeped out of the popped blood blisters, emitting a stench that could make anyone feel nauseous. And as it flowed out of the wounds, it resulted in Hushy's fingertips becoming slightly stained. Yet, it was precisely that pus that could infect people. However, Hushy's expression didn't change at all. Using water's spiritual power, she focused it into a fine spray that landed on Gu Yidao's body, washing clean all of the wounds. After all the wounds had been cleaned, Gu Yidao slipped into a coma. Yet even unconscious, he still released pained groans. Hushy looked at Gu Lufeng and indifferently said, "It's done. I predict that he'll be fine after half an hour." Gu Lufeng was startled at first, before his expression immediately turned into one of excitement. His feet staggered due to having been standing so rigidly this whole time, and he almost fell to the ground. Hushy retreated to the side, but one of her small hands was instantly captured by Nangongyu. Before Hushy could react, Nangongyu grabbed her hand and gently pressed the back of it against his lips, and that was precisely the area that had been stained with Gu Yidao's blood. Chapter 327, Begging for an Antidote. Watching Shangguan Rue, who had eaten the 5 elements blood coagulation pill, they could see that he was now breathing as steadily as a normal person, that he could stand and walk normally, and that the wounds on his body had begun to heal. Comparing both sides, Feng Lianying's medical skills were more advanced than Hushy's. Consequently, everyone sneered at Hushy and Gu Lufeng, enjoying their misfortune as they asked Feng Lianying for a 5 elements blood coagulation pill for themselves. However, although Feng Lianying had a lot of 5 elements blood coagulation pills, it was impossible for her to supply it to everyone. This meant that many poisoned martial artists could only helplessly watch their bodies festering, without the opportunity to be cured. Ice Lotus Fairy, I beg you, give me a blood coagulation pill. My brother is going to die. Someone kneeling in front of Feng Lianying was piteously entreating her before they were soon kicked away by someone else. Who do you think you are? You're merely a rogue cultivator one, without any sect or clan, but you dare to ask Ice Lotus Fairy to waste a precious 5 elements blood coagulation pill on you? Don't dream. Such weak people like you guys originally shouldn't have entered 100 Herb Mist. Now that you've come here to die, blame your own bad fate, don't blame others. That's right, if low martial artists like you guys are going to die, then just die. Why fight over medicinal pills with us? Ice Lotus Fairy, I am the disciple of Black Ice Clan's great elder, from Haoyu country. We, the Black Ice Clan, and the Luli sect, have always been on good terms. Please give me the antidote. Feng Lianying looked at the person who was currently kneeling at her feet and trying to win her favor as they begged for an antidote, and the pride on her face couldn't be concealed. This kind of worship and the feeling of holding someone else's life in the palm of your hand was wonderful. There were only 2 bottles of 5 elements blood coagulation pills in her hands, so naturally, she couldn't assign them to those who had no sect or clan. They were of no assistance to the Feng family or her reputation. Soon, all of the 5 elements blood coagulation pills had been divided, with most of them being given to the children of influential families or the elite disciples of large sections. While those who didn't manage to receive the medicine were forcibly banished to the side by disciples of the Luli sect to prevent the infection from spreading, those people huddled together. The excitement on their faces had long since disappeared to be replaced with despair. Someone couldn't help shouting, Ice Lotus Fairy, don't you have any compassion in your heart that allows you to take pity on our lives? Why are you only saving powerful people, but ignoring us? Exactly. You're unworthy of your name, you faker. So if the martial artists who were children of influential families are worth saving, don't tell me. Our lives are unworthy? Wah, who will save my father? However, those people's curses and protests were halted by a fierce attack technique from the disciples of the Luli sect. If anyone dares to slender Ice Lotus Fairy again, I'll let him die now. Since all of you are in this condition, just blame yourselves for overestimating your capabilities and having delusions of getting your hands on the herbs in the medicinal field. As you've all fallen to such a state, you only have yourselves to blame. These people's hearts were full of desperation, but unfortunately, they were powerless to do anything. They could only silently bear the ridicule from the children of influential families, and watch as one by one, they took a 5 elements blood coagulation pill from Ice Lotus Fairy's hand, while they could only wait to die. However, just when those people had all received a 5 elements blood coagulation pill and were about to swallow them, a sudden scream was heard. Shangguan Rue, standing behind Feng Li and Ying, was releasing an ear-piercing scream. It looked like Shangguan Rue's face that had already healed, at this moment, was being squeezed by a force from inside of his body, making his entire face continuously distort and deform. 1. Rogue cultivators literally translates as loose cultivators. Independent cultivators are unaffiliated with any sect, clan, or other martial organizations. Chapter 328. Exploded. Shangguan Rue's face was filled with fright and pain, and his body kept rolling about on the ground. The blood blisters that had already disappeared were now reappearing extremely fast. However, it was far from over. When everyone was at a loss of what to do, a loud bang was suddenly heard from Shangguan Rue as his body unexpectedly exploded. Black pus and blood splattered everywhere, and even 2 disciples of the Luli sect weren't spared. It was too late for them to flee, and they ended up splashed with blood. After the explosion, everyone looked at the place where Shangguan Rue had been reclining, finding that there was no dead body or bones, just a large pool of blood. The most terrible thing was that the blood seemed to be alive as it struggled to squirm towards the crowd. For a moment, everyone was shocked by the incredible scene before their eyes. It was only after a long while that someone finally screamed, their expression one of horror as they ran away. When the blood neared where Hushi and the others were, a man in black clothes slowly stepped forward with an indifferent expression on his face. Opening a porcelain bottle he held in his hand, he then poured a medicinal liquid onto the blood. The blood violently bubbled, and with an almost pained sound, it seemed to want to flee. This medicinal liquid was like the blood's nemesis. It desperately wanted to escape, but it was powerless to do anything. After a short time, the blood disappeared in a plume of steam. Everyone stared blankly at the scene. They just couldn't believe their own eyes. Shangguan Rue, he actually exploded. Moreover, he turned into a pool of blood? What did that mean? Did it mean that the 5 elements blood coagulation pill was ineffective at curing Shangguan Rue and had killed him instead? That meant that Ice Lotus Fairy was incapable of treating those infected with poison. Instead, the 5 elements blood coagulation pill that everyone had been fighting over just moments before was actually a poison that would kill them. Arg! Some of the martial artists let out terrified screams as they started throwing the pill, which had been so hard to get, as far away from them as possible like a hot potato. However, several of them who'd already swallowed a 5 elements blood coagulation pill went completely pale, and with their bodies twitching, they dug their fingers down their throats to vomit the pill out. Since they'd swallowed a 5 elements blood coagulation pill, then didn't that mean they would become like Shangguan Rue and ultimately turn into a pool of blood after suffering a violent death? No, Dash. That was impossible, Dash. They didn't want to die. Feng Li and Ying, didn't you say that the 5 elements blood coagulation pill would definitely cure us? Then what on earth happened to Shangguan Rue? You vicious woman, you lied to get me to take a 5 elements blood coagulation pill. If I die, my master will never let you go. What Ice Lotus Fairy? She's nothing but a swindler posing as a medical genius. Pa. Feng Li and Ying, if my senior brother dies, My Ling Xiao sect will refuse to ever be allies with you. Feng Lianying's face had currently turned a horrid shade of green and purple. She couldn't at all believe what had just happened. Shangguan Rui had actually died. Impossible. It was simply impossible. Her diagnosis, her medicine, how could any of it be wrong? It must be that Shangguan Rui was infected by another poison, right? That's right. The problem must have come from Shangguan Rui himself. With this thought, Feng Lianing suddenly shouted, "The problem isn't my medical skills, and my diagnosis wasn't wrong. This was just an unexpected tragedy caused by Shangguan Rui's own problem. If you don't believe me, try it again. The next person won't suffer from such a situation." Chapter 329. MAD, the 5 elements blood coagulation pill, is definitely the cure for intoxicated blood poison. However, how could any of those people still believe her? And they indignantly shouted, "You want us to try again? Do you want us to end up as miserable as Shangguan Rui? Keep dreaming." Feng Lianing was furious after hearing all the accusations and watched as the martial artists from influential families refused to eat the 5 elements blood coagulation pill, while those who'd already swallowed them forcefully vomited them out. Feng Lianing suddenly took out an additional 3 pills that she'd hidden inside her sleeve for bargaining with in the future. Then, she rushed towards the martial artists without influence. The group of banished martial artists had initially been rejoicing that they'd escaped from such a calamity, but now that they saw Feng Lianing rushing over, they immediately screamed and fled in all directions. At this moment, Feng Lianing had completely lost all traces of sanity. Wearing heavenly silk gloves on her hands, she grabbed a person and then stuffed a 5 elements blood coagulation pill into his mouth as she murmured, "There won't be any problem. My diagnosis will never be wrong." In order to speed up the effect of the 5 elements blood coagulation pill, she even forced some of her spiritual power into that person's body. This would cause the medicine to be rapidly absorbed, regardless of the impurities in the pill that might cause harm to the martial artist. However, after the period it takes an incense stick to burn, Feng Lianing quickly retreated in horror. With a loud bang, another person exploded and turned into a pool of blood that squirmed about on the ground. "Oh, dead. Dead again. Shunner dash. Feng Lianing, you vicious woman, return my son's life." Shunner. The martial artist's mother saw the pool of blood that used to be her son, and with her eyes red due to hatred, she charged towards Feng Lianing. However, her cultivation base was nowhere near good enough for her to be an opponent with Lu Li sect's bodyguards, and she was quickly kicked to the ground, causing her to spit out blood. The group of powerless martial artists were now alarmed, and they glared at Feng Lianing with hatred and resentment. This woman, in their eyes, had been as beautiful and as pure as a goddess in the heavens. Now, she'd revealed herself to be a ruthless and viciously evil woman. What's the use of calling such a woman Ice Lotus Fairy? It's simply insulting the title of a fairy. At this moment, Gu Yidao, who'd remained unconscious on the ground the whole time, groaned and slowly opened his eyes. Gu Liufeng's face filled with surprise. Quickly helping to support his uncle sit up, he asked, "How are you feeling, uncle? Do you feel better now?" Gu Yidao bared his teeth and frowned, but eventually, he stretched his lips into a smile. "You can rest assured, Lu Feng. I feel much better now." Hushi crouched down and grabbed his wrist to take his pulse before nodding. "The poison in your body has been completely expelled, while your wounds are no longer weeping pus. You can now use your spiritual power to assist in healing your wounds." Sure enough, Gu Yidao's wounds were now only leaking healthy red blood, whereas previously they'd been oozing a black-yellow liquid. Gu Yidao bit his lip, as though he was suffering from pain, and he slowly began to circulate his spiritual power to nourish the wounds on his body. A moment later, the wounds that had slowly been trickling blood dried up. Although it wasn't possible for them to completely heal right away, his body seemed to be in a much better condition than it was before, and he could even see again. Gu Yidao looked at the wounds he'd sustained that were no longer bleeding. His body trembled slightly, and he stared gratefully at Hushi. I didn't think that I'd survive. I thought I would have died already. Chapter 330. Why? The rims of Gu Liufeng's eyes slightly reddened and glinted as he looked at Hushi, his voice hoarse. Shiyu, I don't know how to thank you. Anyway, if you need something in the future, I, Gu Lufeng, won't hesitate to brave any danger for you, without a word of complaint. Rubbish. Didn't you help me before? While speaking, Hushi threw a bottle of medicine to him and indifferently said, applying this to his wounds can help speed up the healing. However, these wounds are a bit unusual, so they might not disappear within a month. The meaning of her words meant that she didn't accept Gu Liufeng's promise to give her his life for saving Gu Yidao's life. At most, what she'd done was only repay the favor she owed Gu Lufeng. Moreover, the words "we're friends, aren't we?" that Gu Lufeng had previously said remained in her mind. Friendsum? She didn't quite understand the meaning of this word, though. A smile reached Gu Liufeng's eyes, and he finally recovered his usual languid and graceful expression. He took the medicine bottle and smiled lightly. Unexpectedly, saving your life has turned into one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. The atmosphere around Hushi and Gu Lufeng was very harmonious. However, Nangongyu, watching from the side, had a dark and gloomy expression on his face. He recalled that in Zijin Palace Hushi had faced him with a cold scowl, as if she would off all relations with him. This made his heart pound with fear, so for a moment, he didn't dare do anything too rash. Nonetheless, Qinglong noticed his master's gloomy expression. So, quietly coughing, he stepped forward and said, "Young Master Shi, your medical skills are indeed amazing, but we still have many things that we don't understand. Even though the ingredients for your medicine and Feng Lian Ying's were the same, how come Gu Yidao survived, while Shangguan Rui became a pool of blood?" "Yeah, you're right." Wu Yu also moved closer, his face filled with a smug excitement as he said, "Moreover, if the spiritual plants in the medicinal field were eaten, wouldn't they be poisonous? How come Gu Yidao was able to eat them but still be okay?" At this time, everyone's gaze and attention were focused on this lively group of people. Gu Yidao seemed healthy, his wounds were beginning to heal, and there was no trace of a poisonous backlash. They were so shocked that their eyes were almost popping out of their sockets. This Foundation establishment stage boy had actually managed to cure this strange poison, while Ice Lotus Fairy, who they all previously placed high hopes on, and had spoken with such confidence, had ended up terribly failing. No one expected the results to be so unexpected. At the same time, once Feng Lianing had seen that Hushi had really cured Gu Yidao, she completely lost her mind. She didn't believe that her medical skills were inferior to that slut's. Impossible dash. Impossible dash. My diagnosis was absolutely not wrong. I'm a 5th-ranked doctor and a direct disciple of Thousand Venom Valley's master. How could I lose to this slut? Give me the pill, and I'll find someone to try the medicine again. I will never admit defeat. Hysterical yelling like a maniac echoed around Thousand Herb Mist, and everyone looked at the woman's sinister expression, feeling nothing but disgust and hatred. This so-called Ice Lotus Fairy was merely an idiot with an undeserved reputation. She had no excellent medical skills. What was even more embarrassing is that she'd obviously failed. Yet she still wanted to try her medicine on innocent martial artists, regardless of people's lives. She was really too shameful and malicious. The moment when Feng Lianing was about to find someone else to try her medicine, a palm ruthlessly landed on her face, causing her to stagger to the ground. When Feng Lianing looked up, she saw Feng Yunjing's cold, murderous look. Until when do you want to keep losing face? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.